Okay, welcome to this webinar, Taking Stock, Wins, Gaps, and the Road Ahead for Healthy Food Policy in the Caribbean. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Dr. the Honorable Christopher Tufton, Minister of Health in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Jamaica. Honorable Mauricio Toro, Elect Congress, Representative of Colombia. Dr. Gloria Giraldo, Advisor for NCDs and Mental Health, Caribbean Subregional Program Coordination, Pan American Health Organization. Dr. Heather Armstrong, Head of Chronic Disease and Injuries Department, Office of the Executive Director at the Caribbean Public Health Agency. Ms. Cicera Simon, Head of the Human and Social Division at the OECS Commission. Senior officers of government, civil society organizations across the region, media representatives, colleagues, and friends. My name is Maisha Hutton, the Executive Director of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and once again, welcome. The HCC is delighted to host this webinar in partnership with PAHO, CARPHA, and the OECS Commission. We meet at a pivotal moment, on the heels of the 4th UN High-Level Meeting on NCDs and Mental Health, and as we approach the 20th anniversary of the Port of Spain Declaration on NCDs next year, and as we move steadily towards the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Yet this moment is marked by concern. Progress across key NCD targets remains uneven, and in some areas we are even seeing deterioration, particularly in relation to unhealthy diets. The data is deeply troubling. Recent WHO estimates indicate that on average, in excess of 40% of Caribbean children are now living with overweight and obesity, nearly 1 in every 2 children. At the same time, the evidence is compelling that science-backed food policies, alongside strong systems to safeguard policymaking from conflicts of interest and undue industry influence, have the potential to significantly alter the trajectory of diet-related NCDs for both children and adults. Today's webinar provides an opportunity to reflect on food policy progress, challenges, and lessons learned across the Caribbean, including from Latin America, while also exploring the way forward. We will ask ourselves, where are the models of good practice? What are the catalytic actions that are needed? How do we leverage and scale momentum? And how do we capture and sustain political attention within the current regional and global geopolitical context? What we do know is that we need all hands on deck. Governments, civil society, academia, communities, and the private sector cannot address the challenge in isolation. Collective action, grounded in public health and free from conflicts of interest, is urgently needed if we are to get back on track. Today, we will hear experiences and perspectives from across the region and across sectors. Thank you all for joining us. I now invite our partners to deliver opening remarks, starting with Dr. Giraldo.
Thank you very much, Maisha, and thank you for the invitation. And with protocol having been established, I would like to move forward and salute everybody. Good morning, distinguished colleagues, honorable policymakers, partners, speakers, friends across the Caribbean. On behalf of the Pan American Health Organization, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this important regional conversation on healthy food policy and non-communicable diseases. Across our Caribbean region, we continue to witness the growing impact of obesity and diet-related diseases on persons, neighbors, friends, members of our families. Of course, it also has a major impact on health systems, but it has an impact in our entire societies and national development. We're also seeing how deeply these challenges intersect with climate vulnerability, food insecurity, trade, and overall everyday realities of life. But we're not starting from zero. There is a growing momentum across the region where governments, civil society, as demonstrated here today, researchers, youth advocates, regional institutions are increasingly recognizing that healthier food environments do not happen by accident, they happen by design, and they're shaped by public policy, leadership, and collective action. Today's discussion is especially timely as PAHO, WHO, continues supporting countries through major regional initiatives as the WHO Acceleration Plan to Stop Obesity and the PAHO Better Care for NCDs initiative. They all aim to not only prevent, but also to emphasize and improve cares of NCDs. Of course, we acknowledge that advancing healthy food policy is not always easy. Countries continue to face complex pressures, including the commercial determinants of health, competing economic interests. Yet the Caribbean has repeatedly shown it can lead globally with courage, innovation, and solidarity. This webinar is an opportunity to learn from each other, share practical experiences, strengthen partnerships, and identify concrete actions that can accelerate progress for the health of our people, especially children, youth. PAHO is proud to stand along the Caribbean Public Healthcare Agency, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and the OECS Commission, ministries, academy, and civil society in this shared effort. Thank you very much, and I wish us a very productive and inspiring discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Giraldo, and I now hand over to Dr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Maisha. And protocol being established, I will proceed with my brief remarks. Good morning to everyone, colleagues and partners. And on behalf of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar as one of the partners, taking stock, wins, gaps, and the road ahead for healthy food policy in the Caribbean. Of course, I wish to acknowledge our valued partners, HCC, PAHO, and the OECS Commission for their continued collaboration and leadership in advancing healthier food environments across the region. We know that the Caribbean continues to face one of the highest burdens of NCDs globally, with unhealthy diets remaining a major driver of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers. And in response, CARPHA has championed the 6-point policy package for healthier food environments, food security, and sustainable development as a comprehensive evidence-based framework to support regional action. Over the years, we have seen important gains. Several countries have advanced sweetened beverage taxes, strengthened school nutrition policies, and contributed to regional momentum on food of package warning labeling and trans fat regulation. These achievements demonstrate that progress is possible through political commitment, partnerships, and sustained advocacy. At the same time, we acknowledge that important gaps remain. Policy implementation and enforcement continue to be uneven across the region, and challenges such as undue industry influence, limited regulatory capacity, and slow policy adoption continue to hinder progress. Protecting children from unhealthy food marketing and ensuring healthier food environments in schools and communities must remain urgent priorities. Today's webinar provides an important opportunity to reflect honestly on where we are, identify practical solutions, and strengthen collective regional action. Conversation must now move beyond policy development towards accelerating implementation, accountability, and measurable impact. Thank you for joining us, and I look forward to rich and productive discussions.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong, and I now hand over to Ms. Simon.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I wish to adopt the protocols already established. The OECS Commission is delighted to collaborate with the HCC, the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, PAHO, and CARPHA on this essential dialogue as we reaffirm our commitment to creating a healthier environment and securing the future well-being of our citizens. Today's reflections on the wins, the gaps, and the road ahead for healthy food policy in the Caribbean is both an urgent and very compelling area of discussion that must be prioritized. Only recently, the OECS Commission, during the period November of 2025 to February of 2026, we conducted a survey of students in the OECS within grades K, kindergarten, all the way to Form 5. We were able to capture the voices of 67,000 children across the region. And this survey has provided a critical window into regional school feeding needs, that because we ask a very important question to students, and a simple one, whether they had breakfast or before attending school. The data reveals that while many students start the day nourished, a consistent and concerning trend emerged as they move through the system. While 85% of the lower primary students, that's kindergarten to grade 2, reported having breakfast daily, this figure drops to about 81% in the upper primary grades, that is grades 3 to 6. And it reaches its sharpest point of concern at the upper secondary level, forms 4 to 5, where as many as 35% of students reported arriving at school without this essential meal. Beyond just the access to the food or to a healthy breakfast, the census qualitative data reveals that there are significant dissatisfaction among students with food quality, cafeteria cleanliness, and a desire for more diverse and healthier choices. These findings underscore that school nutrition is not merely a welfare or concern, but a foundational requirement, a fundamental need for learning readiness, well-being, and equity across OECS education systems. This requires a whole school, a whole of society approach. We look forward to the rich discussions today, learning from our regional and international partners and translating the insights shared into actionable recommendations to further strengthen food policy and actions throughout the OECS and the wider Eastern Caribbean. I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Simon, Dr. Giraldo, and Dr. Armstrong for those scene-setting remarks, which really, again, once reinforce and underscore the high-level prioritization of this issue across the region. So we're now going to bring PAHO back on to speak to us. Dr. Giraldo is going to set the stage and share the status of food policy implementation across the region. Dr. Giraldo, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you again, and thank you for the opportunity. So I will now bring a deck of slides. Of course, we know images speak more loudly than words, as well as the opportunity to walk you through some very concerning data that many of you may be familiar with. I will be putting it into slide mode, just 1 second. And I will also now have to swap, correct? Or is it, please alert me if it's in the correct.
It's got, you can see your notes, Gloria, so I don't know if you can.
Yes, I will swap. I can swap. It would allow me. Yes. Thank you. So perfect. My charge this morning is to set the stage for the conversation. For many of you, some of this information is already well known, but we want to have the same base from where to start. How are we doing in terms of NCD progress? How are we performing on healthy food policy? We know so many of us have seen data like this. This is globally. We know that NCDs continue to be the major cause of death in the world, in our region. In fact, the breakdowns here are very similar to what happens in the Caribbean, and I will be showing data for the Caribbean in the next slides. All of our data is available on our website and on our portal. It's called NLACE, NLACE portal, data for NCD. You can Google that and do your own searches and actually get much deeper into the data for your needs. What do we observe? We know our regional trends. Higher consumption of high-calorie processed foods, rich in fats, salts, sugars, including sugar-sweetened beverages, low consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and omega-3 rich foods, and unacceptable levels of physical activity for all of us, especially for the adults, but also for our children and our youth. What does this all lead us to? It leads us to having a premature mortality that is actually higher in the English-speaking Caribbean than even in the region of the Americas as a whole. So in the right-hand side, you will see some data for the countries. This is the probability of dying between the ages of 30 and 70 from one of the major NCDs. And of course, I'll go fast. You will see many charts and colors, but this is more an invitation to take a deeper dive into the data and also find your own country. The data can be segregated by country, and you can see where your country stands. We know childhood obesity is a major and concerning issue. So if we were to see this type of trends in any type of communicable disease, this upward trend in a constricted time period, we have a pandemic. What happens in obesity and all the NCDs is that we see it in an extended period of time. But this chart here covers our lifetimes of many of us here present from about 1977 to 2017. And the data has not changed, even up to 2022, we'll show in a second. But for a second, please watch carefully on the screen and see how this has happened if we were to look at it in a constricted amount of time. Look at our countries and see how the chart gets red and red and a deeper and deeper red, showing the alarming rates of childhood obesity in our countries. This is the reality that we're dealing with. If we look at, I updated it to 2022, but the trends are exactly the same and going exactly opposite to the direction that we would like them to be going. When we look at the adults, so we just saw the children, but of course, our human bodies develop throughout the life course. And unfortunately, if we're starting off with a higher BMI as children and as adolescents, of course, it leads to adults over the age of 20 that continue in the same pattern. And this does not put us in a very good trajectory. Therefore, here are some of the data for the adults. These are all of our CARICOM countries. And then we can see some of those consequences. Diabetes, with very, unfortunately, high rates in some of our countries that almost doubles the rate for the Americas. And similarly, it is the case for the for hypertension. So this is a bit too much, too many colors, too many charts. Nonetheless, again, it's an invitation for us to continue to be very conscientious about each of our countries' data and where they stand. However, what we know is that non-communicable diseases are really the tip of the iceberg. And this has been reflected in numerous declarations, starting from the Port of Spain Declaration, but more recently in the Bridgetown Declaration. And there is, you can visit and find the declaration where our ministers from our Caribbean countries, as well as the Pacific SIDS, small island developing states, also called their attention and the urgency to responding effectively to the NCDs and to this particular conditions of the islands, country, the SIDS, because of the high dependence on imported food, medicine, diagnostic devices, commercial influence, and trade-related challenges. So if we go deeper, the non-communicable diseases are just the manifestations of the commercial determinants of health. And what are those? Those commercial determinants might be a fancy word. However, it's simply how products are designed, what are the pricing on those products, the marketing, the lobbying, the litigation, the supply chains, the trade rules, the corporate political activities, and the influences the political influences on the policy-making space. So today we have statistical methods and many other approaches in which can see which commercial products have a major influence on mortality directly linked. So we have agreements globally for all countries and signatories of all the World Health Organization and PAHO members, and we can see that these commercial determinants, we're trying to counteract them with policies, with best buys, and we have to measure those. And we're making commitments to measure those by the year 2030. So we have the NCD Global Monitoring Framework. And then I'll show you that we're struggling. We're struggling to, in those monitoring indicators, because as you can see, there is many red squares. So I'm going to break this down a little bit further to focus on the policy issues related to food. Again, we have a multitude of published materials that are all accessible on our websites, where you can see deeply the indicators that I'm discussing here. So this is all of the Americas. And we can see that there is from green to yellow to red. But today we're focusing here on the Caribbean. These are our English-speaking Caribbean countries. And we can see that there is a lot of work, because we see that there is the markings of no progress per the color red. But let me move forward and focus and zoom into what this means. So countries make a lot of effort and are working towards having targets, working on population-based surveys, having NCD plans, and we're moving towards having and improving in these areas. In the healthy diet, so what's here is where we need to do the most. We need to work on the front of package labeling, on public food procurement for healthy diets, for marketing to children, restrictions to children, to marketing to children, breast milk substitutes. So this is why we're here today. And we can observe that when we go country by country, what has been reported to us up to the year 2025, based on the indicators, based on the criteria, we still need to a lot of work. So let us see that there is some progress. There is good news that you will be hearing about today. So I won't go into any detail, but there is progress in the school nutrition policies, as we will see. I will hear from some of those countries. And breastfeeding policies and rates, there is progress, but room for improvement, definitely. Our goal is to have to increase the rate of exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months up to 60%, and countries having approved national infant feeding and breastfeeding policies. Salt. Although here you might see if in your left side of the screen, the non-Latin Caribbean or the English-speaking Caribbean appear to be actually doing a little better than the rest of the sub-regions of the Americas. Nonetheless, we know that much of the salt intake comes from the ultra-processed foods, and this is an area that we have to continue to work on. The status of mandatory sodium reformulation. These are all databases that can be searched, but we can see the dots are very tiny, but there aren't as many, or there aren't as many countries in the Caribbean that have mandatory sodium reformulation. So we have resources. I am moving a little faster because I don't want to take away from our next presenters, but there are many tools, and we have and continue to work closely with countries in areas that are needed, such as also not only salt reduction, trans fat elimination. But I'll end up by mentioning, of course, some of the areas that we need to continue to work very closely together on the front of package octagonal warning labels and the industrially produced trans fat elimination, as I mentioned. We have an upcoming workshop at PAHO with our partners, with countries that are moving forward in these areas. And I just want to show you that in the region, in the rest of the Americas, countries have been making progress in the adoption of the octagonal warning label. So we can exchange, learn ideas, and see how we can move the Caribbean forward. So we do see areas of progress, like I mentioned before, school nutrition policies, countries advancing in elimination of trans fatty acids, such as Barbados and Jamaica, and advances in legislation, such as in Bahamas. And we will be learning much more today. So I wanted to bring up a bit of the reality check with some of that very sobering data that I presented, but knowing that also there are tools and that there is progress which will be fully discussed in the rest of the webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Giraldo. Excellent, excellent presentation. The visuals are fantastic. Some key takeaways in LACE. It's an excellent resource. Please visit it. The trends we saw, the overwhelming red, especially in that area of childhood obesity. There's progress. We also have lots of resources at PAHO. Please visit the website. And I like that last minute plug for front of package warning labeling. So thanks again, Dr. Giraldo. We appreciate that. Now we're moving to a special speaker. We're very delighted to have a speaker from outside of the region join us today. A logistical note, Mr. Mauricio Toro, the Honorable Mr. Toro, he's a Spanish speaker, so we will ask you to use the translation function, or the interpretation function rather, at the top right-hand side of your screen. Mr. Mauricio Toro is a recently re-elected Congress representative of Colombia, so congratulations. He's been instrumental in the introduction of key entity policies, including front-of-package warning labeling and taxation of sugar-sweetened beverages. We are privileged to have the perspective of a second policymaker, that unique perspective, presenting and sharing with us his experience today. Mr. Toro, over to you. Welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Hello, everyone. I prefer to give this presentation in Spanish since my accent and pronunciation in English are not very strong, and I want to be clear and concise as possible, so I understand that we are going to have a translation. So I will structure my presentation in 5 specific points to be concise as possible. Thank you very much.
Then I'm going to start the presentation facing 5 key elements that are important and that have been part of our learning in this trajectory, in this path of approving different laws, different bills, that especially the ones that I was a co-author, that was the warning of food that is ultra-processed food in Colombia. It took about 18 years and more than 11 failed bills. The first learning that we had in Colombia, after trying so many times and after being in so many debates before being approved, is that the scientific evidence by itself does not win the political debate, even though we know that science is much needed. Bills are approved politically. So that implies that besides having all the evidence, the scientific evidence that we do have, especially that is free from all conflict of interest for the industry, if we don't build a public narrative, if there is no partnerships with civil society, and especially if we don't have a citizenship pressure, in this case, the industry is going to continue winning. The first times that we tried, they were based in a structure practically in the technical and scientific evidence free of interest, where we were talking about how important it was to have a health policy when it came to food, and to have not only the tax for food that is has been no label and it was ultra processed, and all of that was really not so useful. And I understand that this debate goes from politics, and this evidence is not enough then. So the main problem, or the real problem, was not a technical problem. In Colombia, we never lacked that evidence to approve this front labeling, but we needed that political power to face those political interests that are very powerful. And the barriers at the end were not health barriers, they were financial, politicals, and mostly communication that requires a lot of pushing from the civil society and the pressure from parents and different civil organizations. That was a difference that we had between the 11 failed bills and this one that actually went through. The civil society got together with a very good narrative, talking about the feeling of the families, the suffering of the families of what they were feeding their kids, and campaign where we were talking in a very not technical but very common language, talking to the real regular people for the civil society and citizens to pressure, to push the Congress people to pass this bill. The second learning is that industries never present themselves as an industry. What does that mean? That they make threats that these kinds of laws are going to lead to unemployment for many families, that this is going to cause hundreds of entrepreneurs, small companies, small businesses, and little stores that they are going to go belly up, and they start terrorizing people. They don't talk about the industry as like they pay taxes, they generate employees, that they have associations. They disguise themselves in a message that is going to be a fear mongering. They start with ideology, discourse, narrative, talking about these kind of initiatives come from the left, and that is going to end up with the freedom of the citizens. That is the first step to going to governments that are leftist governments that are going to socialize the industry, and that businesses are going to lose, and all this social movement that is international that is going to end up nationalizing businesses is a very powerful message that is fear-mongering for civil society, and is confusing at the end. And they generate financial risk, so that generates a panic, and that mothers are going to be left, without jobs. So there is all this pressure, from the lobbyists towards Congress, because these kind of narratives outside, it dismissifies any technical argument that we can come with. So we need to have a lot of tools to show that in the countries where this labeling has been implemented, that has not happened. So from the point when we had this debate, only Chile had just approved this labeling in Latin America, and we did not have scientific evidence, especially technical evidence, that that was not true, that the businesses were not going to go belly up, that employment was not going to happen, that we were not going to nationalize industries, that it was going to end with individual rights and freedoms. We didn't have that in this case. There was Colombia, Mexico, Chile was the first ones, and we were the second ones. We had all the information to show that that did not happen, but actually the business has grown because we push them to develop new products that are healthier, and we created a great industry of healthy products because, rooted in this legislation, and there is evidence now, and we can see it in countries that had moved forward on this. And the third learning of the 5 that I have to share with you today is that civil society is decisive. Organizations can achieve with a lot of mobilization of the people, rallies, some actions within or outside of Congress, because they start showing that thanks to the help of, community means, or a small, like also social media, how risky it is not to have adequate information, and to finally, for the Congress and legislators, people that have to listen to civil society that was decisive on this a topic to maintain it alive and active and push Congress, because industry, they don't fight the scientific debate, they fight the political debate. So very rarely they talk, very, the scientific proofs, they talk about individual freedoms, and as I said before, like small businesses, and they end up saying that this is a matter of like parents' responsibility, that are the parents and the ones that have to teach their kids how to eat well, and they omit the fact that they are the ones that are pushing people to make mistakes and to mislead. So to say that parents are agreeing that, of course, we need to collaborate with our foundations to go to the schools and teach young parents how to feed their kids well, but it's a civil society, the ones that center this debate, and then that way the political debate is. We know that now the main battle field is the public opinion, not scientific realm. As they say, for one study, they come up with a different research that are not free of conflict of interest. When they're fear mongers, they show where businesses are going to go broke. That is not true, that this helps with the health, that all of these things are aggressive and they have no effect, that the business helps with tax, and they don't talk with a simple language. And for many of the scientists, it's difficult for them to communicate the importance of their findings in a way that is in a lay for lay people, for the regular society. So it's so important for influencers in the social media to have the power to point out the people that are opposing to this information, to be able to go into the battlefield of public opinion, which is the way that we win this, and then later on we go into the debate of public health. The fourth one is that we need to resist this misinformation, especially this battle that we become too tired with, fatigue of also personal attacks to organizations, to civil organizations, questioning their finances, influencers saying that they are being paid by international movements, socialists, leftists. They start attacking legislators that defend this kind of rules or norms, to be able to weaken us using some powerful means of communication, press, that are at the service of this great industry. This is why free citizens are so important in social media, to resist. And especially they try to delay this conversation until it disappears. Many times the objective of the industry is to getting us tired so that we don't continue fighting, and they just want to cause fatigue, and that's a real strategy. This is very important to take into account, to be able to resist and to avoid the delays. And they ask for work task force task to work, and they are really delaying the work, and I fell into this trick. So we need to have conditions, punctual conditions, and showing them that yes, we're going to have the dialogue and the workforce task force people working on these kind of things. But they also use campaigns in the media to divide the partners that we start having in the civil society. So many times the objective that they have is not to win the political debate, but what they want is to fatigue people, so that is not a priority. So we need to be active, and only civil society and parents and independent influencers and the academia is very important important. Parents is so important also because that way they can support the social debate, and citizens are the ones that help to resist the fatigue. So I insist that the main barrier is not technical but the political when it comes to the debate. Then I end up with the last learning, and that's that we need to build a narrative, as I was saying a few minutes, that simple and morally clear narrative. This is gold in this discussion because many campaigns of these, they fail because they're very highly technical. This happens in other processes before when we were given numbers and what were like non-contagious diseases and percentages and prevalences and the diabetes, the youth diabetes and obesity and the cost in our countries when it comes to public health, all these diseases, and it becomes a narrative that is very technical, is not very sexy, is not very attractive, and then they end up winning the narrative because they simplify the debate. The companies are going to go belly up, mothers are going to be jobless, this is the parents' fault, our products are no bad. So we need to simplify the debate ourselves, and that implies to put a face into these discussions, to talk about the right of information that is clear and true. It's so important to talk about transparency and in a way, of health, public health. They don't understand citizenship. In citizens, though, very sophisticated rules or very complex statistics. So we have to simplify the debate. So in Colombia, we have some campaigns where they had some characters that were like villains. It was a cereal box as a villain, and it had like a mask with some sugar and chocolate. All these characters were villains, and we had this in campaigns and with this in parents networks that they started with other social organizations to put this in TV and cartoons so that people can see these villains. Sodas, for instance, would be a villain. Also, the brand of the soda was villain that would be laughing. Laughing of parents, and would show how these characters were getting children sick and families sick, and the narrative was simplified to the point that it started getting into the homes and people start getting upset, and we started showing how the industry were this very deceiving, how cereal can be more sugary than even a soda, and showing how it was so bad for kids to have this for breakfast. And we started showing how much sugar a product had, and if a parent would give this for a breakfast to a child, and we left the technical talk to the civil society to push for the approval of this law. So these are the 5 elements that are fundamental to be able to move forward when it comes to this fight in all Latin America and the Caribbean. It's possible to join in this and to find partners within the Congress and legislators. And today we have more power than ever of information because we've been successful in other countries, and we can copy these campaigns. We can learn from those campaigns in these countries where this has moved forward, and that way we can show how simplifying the debate we can be able to win. Thank you for the invitation, and I wish you all the success in the approval of the next steps that Latin America needs to take. And in Colombia, you have somebody that is willing to help you to talk about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mr. Toro. It's been such a privilege to hear your experiences. Colombia has been one of the leading countries in terms of the implementation of these progressive food policies. And so hearing your lessons learned and broken down across those 5 areas was really helpful. And I think for most of the advocates on this call, we can relate to the 5 areas you covered. And I think for me, what stood out was the idea of policy driving market expansion and innovation to expand the offerings of healthy foods. So really driving private sector to expand their offerings. Civil society and the role of translating. Translating the very complex technical jargon into relatable content for engaging citizens as co-advocates. We as advocates can't do it on our own, so getting citizens involved. And then the industry playbook-induced fatigue is real, the kind of constantly countering. So engaging, again, that kind of citizenry to help you with the countering. And then closing with the idea of this very simple, morally clear narrative, I thought was very compelling. Thank you so much again for sharing your experience with us today. We have to learn from these lessons. We cannot, continue to kind of repeat what we've done in the past. And really strong lessons from Colombia. We've invited those on the webinar if anyone has questions for you, because we know that you do have to leave soon, to just drop their questions in. And thank you again. We really appreciate your participation. Okay, everyone, we are now moving on to hearing from some of the policy successes that we've had in the region. And our panelists for this next section are, first of all, Ms. Kaj Archer. She is the team lead at the National NCD Commission in the Bahamas at the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We'll also hear from Dr. Miriam Alvarado, who is a postdoctoral research fellow. And we are thrilled to have Dr. the Honorable Christopher Tufton, Minister of Health and Wellness in Jamaica, who will close out the session with experiences as it relates to the recently introduced special consumption tax. So with that said, Kaj, over to you.
Thanks, Maisha. So I'll just start up my presentation. There we go. Can someone confirm you can see my screen, please?
You're good to go, Kaj. We can see.
Awesome. Okay, great. So hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. I'll be speaking on some fiscal measures that can impact the healthy food environment. And I'll also be speaking to some of the measures that we have taken here in the Bahamas in terms of fiscal interventions. So the 2 types of fiscal policies I'll be speaking on today are taxes and subsidies, and to ensure there is a clear understanding of how these policies might work, because I know we have a range of people here from different backgrounds, I'll provide a bit of information about both of them. So fiscal policies are recognized as effective tools for shaping dietary behaviors and encouraging healthier food choices. These policies influence purchasing decisions by making unhealthy products more expensive and healthier options more affordable. So one widely discussed fiscal policy is the implementation of taxes on unhealthy food and beverage items. So for this example, we'll be looking at sugar-sweetened beverage taxes, or SSB taxes. Now, a systematic review and meta-analysis, and I've cited it here on the slide, examined the outcomes of implemented SSB taxes globally and found that these taxes were associated with increased prices of targeted beverages, a 15% reduction in SSB sales, and reformulation efforts resulting in reduced sugar content in taxed beverages, particularly in countries using tiered tax systems. And tiered tax systems are designed so that the tax rate varies depending on how unhealthy a product is. So in the case of SSBs, products with higher sugar content are taxed at a higher rate, encouraging manufacturers to reduce sugar levels in order to avoid higher taxation. So some of the potential challenges with this fiscal measure is that critics argue that SSB taxes may negatively affect small and family-owned retailers through reduced sales and job losses, although evidence of substantial long-term job losses remains limited. Additionally, some consumers perceive these taxes as an example of government overreach that interferes with individual freedom and personal dietary choices. And this underscores the importance of health education prior to and during policy implementation. Another potential challenge is that taxes are not always fully transferred to retail prices, as manufacturers or retailers may absorb part of the cost so that consumers don't really feel it and there's not a noticeable price change. So those are some of the potential challenges when it comes to these sorts of taxes. It is important to acknowledge these when considering which fiscal measure to adopt. so that mechanisms can be put in place to circumvent these challenges where possible. So next up, we will look at subsidies, which represent another important fiscal policy approach. So a subsidy is financial support provided by a government to reduce the cost of a product, service, or activity. And the goal is usually to encourage certain behaviors, make essential goods more affordable, or support industries and public welfare. And in nutrition policy, subsidies may include the removal of value-added tax or VAT on fresh fruits and vegetables. It might look like subsidized school meal programs, or lowering the cost of healthy foods in low-income communities, and supporting local farmers who produce nutritious crops. And these measures can help reduce financial barriers to healthy eating, particularly among vulnerable populations. And this tactic may be effective in terms of improving health outcomes, as research has shown that fiscal measures that lower the price of healthy foods like fruits and vegetables may avert disability-adjusted life years. Now, some of the potential challenges. A challenge we have seen with similar measures is in the Bahamas with this approach, retailers or suppliers may raise prices on goods to compensate for reduced profits from VAT exemptions if we're looking at VAT elimination. And then in some cases, businesses may also fail to fully pass the savings on to consumers, meaning healthier foods do not become significantly cheaper. And to circumvent this, there should be monitoring of retail pricing before and after policy implementation. It's imperative to have effective M&E frameworks in place ahead of policy implementation. And here in the Bahamas, we have our Consumer Protection Commission that is responsible for monitoring such matters. Another challenge is government revenue loss due to VAT removal, and this is where your taxes on unhealthy products like SSVs come in, as they can help to offset some of the losses, right? So when we look at these policies and have discussions around which one is potentially better than the other, it's important to remember that the World Health Organization has noted that no single intervention can ensure that all aspects of the food environment support healthy diets, and that a comprehensive package of policy actions is required. So research examining combined fiscal policy approaches, so for example, using subsidies and taxes, found that implementing taxes on unhealthy foods and beverages together with the removal of VAT on fruits and vegetables could increase fruit and vegetable consumption by approximately 0.7 portions per person per day, while also reducing unhealthy food consumption by 1.4 kilograms. So these findings highlight the potential effectiveness of combining both push and pull strategies to improve dietary behaviors at the population level. WHO also emphasizes that fiscal policy should not operate alone, but alongside other food environment policies such as restrictions on food marketing, nutrition labeling, and school nutrition policies. However, it is important to keep contextual factors and actual policy feasibility in mind when considering which policies to implement. So now I'll delve a bit into the Bahamas and some of the data around food consumption practices, which really underscore the need for fiscal policies in our context. The Bahamas' most recent Global School Health Survey report revealed that only 5.7% and 10.3% of adolescents consume the recommended daily intake of fruits and vegetables, respectively. Also, 31% of adolescents reported experiencing food insecurity due to insufficient food in the home. And these GSHS findings also showed that 80.8% of Bahamian adolescents drink sodas, but only 18.3% meet the recommended daily intake for water. And then when we look at adults, the Bahamas' STEPS 2019 report on NCDs and risk factors note that 85.3% of the population does not meet the recommended intake of five servings of fruits and vegetables per day, and that 50% eat fried foods up to 3 times per week. The report also notes that 60% of the population drink 2 cans or bottles of sugary beverages every day, and on average, Bahamians consume double the recommended daily intake of salt. The report also identified a significant relationship between income and fruit and vegetable consumption. So approximately 92% of persons earning less than or equal to 20,000 BSD annually consumed fewer than 5 servings of fruits and vegetables daily, compared to 80% of persons earning over 60,000 BSD. And these findings demonstrate that affordability remains a major barrier to healthy eating. Many Bahamians are focused primarily on securing basic meals for themselves and their families, often leaving limited opportunity to prioritize nutritional quality. And so reducing the financial burden associated with healthier foods through fiscal measures may help to create greater opportunity for healthier choices and improve dietary behaviors over time. So what are we doing to address the situation? The Bahamas has several policies in place and is developing several policies that have the potential to impact our food environment, namely removal of VAT on unprepared foods, the Health Promotion and Wellness Act, and our National School Breakfast Feeding Program. So let's take a deeper look at some of these interventions. In the Bahamas, the recent removal of VAT on unprepared food items, including fresh fruits and vegetables, which became effective April 1st, 2026, represents a promising step toward improving the food environment and increasing access to healthier foods. So modeling studies suggest that eliminating VAT on fruits and vegetables may lead to increased consumption, reductions in diet-related disease burden, lower societal healthcare costs, averted deaths, and additional life years saved. So I think it will be really interesting to see the results of future STEPS reports following this critical step. Next, we have the Health Promotion and Wellness Act, which presents an additional opportunity for the implementation of fiscal policies aimed at addressing unhealthy food environments. Section 9 of the Act gives the Minister of Health and Wellness the legal authority to adopt and implement national, regional, and global public health policies through regulations, including imposing limits on specific nutrient content in food products for consumption, and identifying food products and beverages that pose harmful effects on human health, and in consultation with the Ministry of Finance, proposing fiscal measures. So what does this mean? This legislative framework could support measures such as setting maximum limits for free sugars in beverages and implementing taxes on products that exceed those thresholds, as an example. So such policies could encourage product reformulation by manufacturers while also incentivizing consumers to choose healthier alternatives. And then finally, we have the National School Breakfast Program, which is another means by which the Bahamas is influencing the food landscape. Earlier, I noted that one example of a subsidy is when the government covers the cost of school meals, and the Bahamian government is doing just that with this program. And so the National School Breakfast Feeding Program, it provides nutritious meals to all public pre-primary and primary schools across the islands of the Bahamas, meaning students have the option to consume at least one healthy meal daily, right? And currently it's providing meals to 20,000 students across the country. So as you can see, the Bahamas is taking steps to create healthier food environments, and this is necessary as the data show a worrying picture of the current landscape with potentially detrimental impacts for the future if we do nothing. So I hope the information shared is of value to all of you in your different contexts, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kaj. That was great to see the progress the Bahamas is making and the kind of priority areas that are being focused on right now. I now invite Dr. Miriam Alvarado. She's going to share with us on sweetened beverage taxes in the Caribbean, progress, impact, and lessons learned. Dr. Alvarado, we can see your slides. Just waiting for slide presentation view. Perfect. Go ahead.
Yes, okay, great. Hi, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. As Maisha mentioned, I'll be focusing in on sweetened beverage taxes, building on what we heard just now, and exploring progress, impact, and lessons learned across the region. I wanted to start off with this image just to highlight that when we talk about sugar-sweetened beverages, it's easy to default to thinking about sodas or maybe energy drinks, but that this category of products and the health harms that are associated with them also include juice drinks, which often have just as high, if not higher, levels of total free sugar. So I'll come on to this again a little bit later. Just to back up for a moment, why target sugar-sweetened beverages in the region? As you can see on the right here, we have kind of average SSB consumption globally and then across major regions. And you can see that Latin America and the Caribbean comes in as the highest regionally. But the picture is even more stark when we look at country-specific estimates. And you can see that across some countries in the Caribbean, we have SSB consumption estimates that are 3, 4, or even many more times higher than the global average. So specifically in the Caribbean, it makes a lot of sense to target this particular product. We know in Barbados, for example, where kind of detailed nutritional dietary recall data have been collected, the average adult is getting an additional 220 calories from SSBs per day. And these are products that are often referred to as empty calories, meaning that they contain almost no or very limited nutritional value in terms of limited proteins, vitamins, minerals. So another way of thinking about this is that unless the average person eats incredibly nutrient-dense otherwise, and like zero other treats, it's virtually impossible to meet the nutrition guidelines and not exceed calories at this level of SSB consumption. So in other words, there's no way for SSBs consumed at this level to be part of a healthy and balanced diet. And we heard earlier how many people are not meeting those kind of nutrient recommended dietary intake levels. So this is really a major concern and motivation for targeting these products in particular. What are the health consequences of this? So in addition to their impact on overweight and obesity through excess caloric intake, we know that SSBs independently raise the risk for things like type 2 diabetes and are also associated with higher levels of cardiovascular disease, dental caries, childhood asthma, and several types of cancers. In terms of diabetes alone, 1 in 4 new cases of type 2 diabetes can be attributed to high levels of SSB consumption. But we know that if a heavy SSB drinker stops completely, they can reduce their risk of developing type 2 diabetes within 4 years. So changes made today can really quite quickly have an impact in terms of risk profile for these NCDs. And you can see that sort of time delay visualized here. So why use taxes in particular? We heard a little bit about this already, including results from systematic reviews that Kaj summarized. I'll just flag briefly that new empirical evaluations, so not simulation studies, but assessments of real-world taxes and their real-world impacts on populations, have shown measurable improvements in body mass index, the prevalence of overweight and obesity, oral health, gestational diabetes, childhood asthma. So the evidence is really building that these policies, when strong and designed well and effective, can translate into measurable and real health impacts at a population level. So I think this is really exciting. And additionally, the SSB taxes are one of the few kind of food policies that also have the added benefit of generating revenue. So I think we can see which direction the scales are tipping in terms of support for these policies. Turning to the Caribbean, 7 countries tax SSBs. So we have a 20% tax in Barbados, a specific tax in Belize, a tax in Dominica, which is only applied to limited types of SSBs, so not across the board. The newly implemented tax in Jamaica, which I believe we'll be hearing more about shortly, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and then 2 smaller taxes in St. Kitts and Nevis and Suriname. And although not considered a formal health tax, Grenada has introduced a differentiated VAT, whereby SSBs are applied value-added tax at a higher rate than other products. So this is kind of an 8th example, although it's not technically classified as a health tax because of the differentiated VAT design. So out of all of these taxes, only one has been, only one that I'm aware of has been evaluated. And I saw in the comments someone highlighting the importance of monitoring and evaluation. So I just want to underscore that point, especially because many of the evaluations of these policies have been done around specific tax designs and often in high-income country settings. So it is really useful to understand the nuts and bolts of what's happening within a more regional context. And I know from experience that conducting these kind of evaluations is challenging, especially in data scarce settings. But if anyone on the call is interested in exploring ways to move forward with evaluations in other countries, I'd be really happy to have follow-up conversations about kind of creative ways to get the access to data and funding and human capacity to do those kind of evaluations. So please feel free to reach out after. In terms of what the evaluation of the Barbados SSB tax found, it's been done in 2 stages. So the tax was initially introduced as a 10% tax. That was found to reduce SSB sales, at least in a major supermarket chain, by about 4.3%. And this is what we would have expected because the 10% tax led to about a 5 or 6% increase in prices. We heard earlier how the tax doesn't necessarily translate into 100% pass-through. So after a 5 or 6% increase in price, a drop of about 4% is within the realm of what we would have expected. The 2022 increase to 20% evaluation is still being finalized, but what I can share with you today is that we saw some products demonstrate increases in price and substantial decreases in sales again. And these include things like a 10% reduction in sales of sweetened dairy and sports and energy drinks. But the story with sodas was more complicated. And in fact, for some other factors related to the tax design, I think, as well as some macroeconomic factors, we actually saw an increase in soda sales. So the kind of details around this are going to be forthcoming. But I wanted to flag that the story is a little bit more complicated, although for some products, we saw the tax working exactly as expected. Our best estimate in terms of the impact of the original 10% tax on diabetes in particular is that between 2015 and 2024, so over that 10-year period, the tax is estimated to have averted about 150 cases of type 2 diabetes. This might sound small at first, but I want to kind of challenge us to think about putting this in context of how difficult it is to achieve these kinds of changes. So there's 2 main pathways to achieve reductions in type 2 diabetes. You can target high-risk populations, so people in a pre-diabetes stage, or you can use population-based approaches or a combination of both. An important question is how effective are these different policies and how much do they cost? So this is indicative. I had to make several assumptions to create kind of an apples-to-apples comparison here. But I just wanted to make the point that when we target high-risk populations, to avert the same 150 cases of diabetes would likely have cost upwards of 8 million Barbados. So we can do it, but there's a cost associated. Whereas on the SSB tax side, we know from studies around the world and from data in Barbados that the tax is revenue generating, potentially generating in the tens of millions of dollars. And so it doesn't have a direct cost as a healthcare setting. There might be some small costs in terms of enforcement and setting up the tax in the beginning. But this is really a policy that can achieve those health benefits while also generating revenue, which can then be used to further some of these other approaches to improving health. We heard a bit about subsidies, and again, I'll highlight that subsidies can be effective and cost-effective, but we need to take into account unintended consequences. And in some settings, in some designs, they've actually been shown to be associated with worse health outcomes and a higher cost. So a well-designed subsidy can definitely make an important contribution to health, but the story with subsidies in general is a bit more complicated. Same is true for community-wide efforts to promote diet and physical activity, so not targeting high-risk groups, but sort of workplace, walking groups, workplace interventions, that kind of thing. And we didn't have any studies on mandatory front-of-pack warning labels in the review that we drew on, but I will just flag that forthcoming evidence is really suggesting a high level of effectiveness. So this might be a policy that comes out as being extremely cost-effective as well. I think the lessons learned are that SSB taxes work, but that we need to really strengthen them so that we get the most out of them. And I'll just conclude with this metaphor, which is that I recently had to replace the AC unit in my car. It wasn't working. And so we replaced the unit. We know that these AC units work and they're effective. But somehow, even with the new unit, it wasn't really achieving the cool air I was hoping for. And our mechanic ended up putting kind of soft foam pads around part of the unit because there were gaps and leaks where the effectiveness of the unit was being diminished. And after that quite simple fix, the unit started working perfectly. And I think that's kind of a good image for us to keep in mind when it comes to thinking about these policies. They are effective, and we have in many cases the foundation of a strong policy, but we need to put in those supports to increase how effective the policies are to make sure that we're getting that kind of maximum effectiveness in terms of health outcomes, in terms of behavior change, and in terms of being able to reinvest in other policies to similarly promote NCD prevention and health behaviors. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Alvarado. And Dr. Alvarado, you wouldn't know, but she's actually led on all of the SSB tax evaluation in Barbados, and she's now doing some very innovative work looking at the interaction of the SSB tax and the school nutrition policy with some really novel methods. So we're lucky to have her here in the Caribbean, and I note her offer to extend her skill set across the region. So please reach out if you'd like to speak to her. So thanks, Dr. Alvarado. And we are delighted, as I said earlier, to have a second legislator on our call, and we have from our very own region from Jamaica, the Honorable Minister Christopher Tufton from the Ministry of Health and Wellness in Jamaica, and he's going to be sharing on the recently introduced special consumption tax. Minister Tufton, over to you. We can hear you.
You can hear me? Oh, great.
We can hear you.
All right.
Can't quite see you yet, but hopefully soon.
I think they're working on it. There seem to be some technology challenges here. So can I begin since you're hearing?
Yes. You can go ahead because we can hear you.
Okay, great. So thanks again, Madam Moderator, presenters, specially invited guests, members of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition group. Happy to be on and to support your ongoing initiatives around healthy lifestyle within the region. So the proposed special consumption tax, SET, on sugar beverages forms part of the government's broader strategy to reduce the burden of NCDs. Of course, obesity, diabetes, hypertension continue to pose a significant risks within the Caribbean region, both impacting families, communities, and the economy generally. Excess consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages have been identified as major contributors, particularly among children and young adults. And the policy approach involves encouraging consumers to make healthier choices by, of course, nudging them towards healthier beverage, as well as the manufacturers reducing their sugar content in their beverage. We have been pursuing alongside this a number of public education campaigns, looking at nutrition labeling, and the healthier option, the most healthy being, of course, water. In implementing the SET, consideration was given to potential economic impacts, including efforts on low-income households. There is an argument that is advanced by industry to say the poor will be affected the most by the tax. The response clearly is that the poor is currently being affected more by the illnesses that are caused from excessive consumption of sugary drink. We have accommodated ongoing stakeholder engagement and tried to ensure a balanced, evidence-based approach to supporting the public education. So there is more than enough legitimacy and justification for the approach that we have taken. So the rationale for targeting sugar-sweetened beverages, we prioritize addressing sugar in beverages over solid food items due to a unique biological, nutritional, and regulatory factors that make them a more effective starting point for public health interventions. Some of the biological and metabolic differences: lower satiety, liquid calories are less than solid ones. The brain does not register them as fullness signals as effectively leading individuals to consume extra calories without a corresponding reduction in solid food intake. And this, of course, is the science of the sugary drink. Rapid absorption, sugars in liquid form, they digested and absorbed more quickly than those in solid foods, causing rapid spikes in blood glucose and insulin levels, which can lead to visceral fat production and insulin resistance. Again, scientifically proven. Studies show that each additional sugar drink per day increases a child's risk of obesity by approximately 60%. The nutrition and dietary impact, largest source of added sugar in many regions, sugar-sweetened beverages are the single largest source of added sugars in the diet. A 355 ml serving of soda can contain nearly 9 teaspoons of sugar, often meeting and exceeding the daily recommended limit of 1 drink. And while less than 20% of Jamaicans consume fast foods, which is still bad for you, of course, more than once per week, over 75% consume at least 1 sweetened beverage every day. So the impact across the board would be greater, or is greater, if we target the sugary drink. And then, of course, it's empty calories. Many solid foods that may contain some fiber, vitamin, or protein. Sugary drinks provide high calories with little or no nutritional value. And the displacement, of course, of healthier choices once the preference is made to support sugary drink. The approach and consideration, policy and regulatory advantages, ease of reformulation. We've tried to champion that cause. Industry, of course, pushes back on that. The truth is they can reformulate. They have labs, they have chemists, and it's just the effort that needs to be made. But because sugar is addictive, they knowingly promote the addictive nature of sugar so that consumers will want more and more and more, much to their health disadvantage. So we made that argument very clearly, that you don't have to pay the tax if you reformulate. And that's something we need to be consistent on. Direct policy effectiveness, evidence from countries like the UK shows the tiered taxes on beverage are highly effective at incentivizing manufacturers to lower sugar content and to avoid higher tax brackets. And that strategy is something that we agree with. And the standardized definition, sugary drinks are generally easier to define and categorize for taxation and labeling purposes compared to the diverse range of processed solid foods. We are starting where the evidence is strongest, the consumption is highest, and the harm is greatest. That's really the justification based on all the factors considered to target sugar-sweetened beverages as the first option. The extent of sugar-sweetened beverage in schools is another big one. We have done surveys, 203 schools, to assess the readiness of schools to implement. Schools sell a wide range of beverage, ranging from 1 to 35. Most schools, 80%, sell less than 10 beverage types. So these are some of the stats. So we have a range of stats which allows us to make the case. So we actually do the surveys, see what is on offer. And while we're doing that, as you know, or you may not know, a few years back, we championed the need for a reduction in sugar content in drink sweetened beverages. And we're now at 2.5 grams per 100 ml, which is a WHO standard. The enforcement is a challenge because it's not just up to us. We have to work with the Ministry of Education. We have well over 1,000 schools in Jamaica. And that of course, creates some challenge. I should mention, incidentally, that we are implementing the same policy in our health centers and in our hospitals and health centers. I just passed down policy reinforcing that to ensure that all hospitals, in the interest of staff welfare, must comply with the rules around sugary drink beverage, must have a commissary that provides a healthy meal option, a salad, a sandwich, soup for its staff, must do a walking trail or a gym where the space is available. All part of trying to ensure that we practice what we preach and we set the example while we champion these causes. So the sugar sweetened beverage and NCDs, that evidence is very clear around the links to higher burdens of NCDs, and that evidence is something that we push also in making the case for the tax. Where are we now in closing? Well, there's a lot of toing and froing with manufacturers who do have significant economic power and lobbying capacity, using their various channels to explain all the quote-unquote hardships that they're facing by this tax. It will impact the poor most. They are being forced to, warehousing and inspections and, all the things that, in a sense, offers a distraction to what we're really trying to do. So what we have done, and this is health working with finance, which is the ministry that actually implements the tax. We've agreed to a working group over 12 months. So we've started with the introduction of the tax at a certain point. It's based on the beverage and the grams of sugar in the beverage beyond a certain point, similar to the UK system, and a working group to address concerns that have been raised. So, for example, there are concerns raised about these package of, these syrups, for example, or these mixed drink in a sachet that you add water, and how do you regulate that, and the informal trade somewhat, people that do the bag juice and have no labeling or branding on it. And there are a few of those. There's an informal society in Jamaica. So all of those creates anomalies that official industry complains about and say, well, they're being beaten up on, why we're not taxing everybody with sugar and so on. So it's important, I think, to have a voice, or should I say a forum for conversation. And we have tried to establish that through this working group, and we'll continue to map that over the next year while we refine it. What is key, finally, is that we start the process, we establish the narrative, we champion the cause through advocacy and through partnerships, the Heart Foundation, Cancer Society, others of that sort, NGOs. We collaborate with them, so we have more voices. And we normalize a recognition of the adverse impact of sugary drink or excessive sugar in the consumption habits of our population. And over time, I do believe that once we do that, there will be a recognition to adjust over time, and that's the objectives of the initiative here. So I'll stop there, Madam Chair. That's pretty much Jamaica's experience. Still a lot of work to do. We don't claim to be where we want to be, but we're pressing ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Tufton. We appreciate those remarks, and they complement very nicely the remarks we heard earlier from the legislator from Colombia. The importance of justifying your policy with evidence, and you talked about the real-life evidence that you have. You talked about the industry response and how the ministry is responding to industry arguments. And in fact, this is a catalyst for reformulation, and we also heard this earlier in Colombia. We appreciate also this is being expanded to healthcare centers, and also the importance of your working with advocates and partnerships, and this idea of a solid narrative. We also heard that earlier. And as you move forward, this novel the work group that will allow you to refine as you move through implementation. So thank you for sharing. We appreciate, and we look forward to learning across the region as you implement. We hope that this will be a catalyst for implementation of this type of tax, which not only touches SSBs, but also touches alcohol and tobacco. And seeing more of this across the region is what we hope that this will build this momentum around. So thanks again, Minister Tufton. We appreciate your presence here.
Thank you, and all the best to you.
Thank you. And now I'm going to hand over to Danielle Baldwin. She's our Policy and Operations Manager, and she's going to take you through a bit of a relaxation exercise. We've heard a lot of information today, and now it's your turn to engage in feedback.
Thank you, Maisha. Thanks, Maisha, and good morning, everyone. As Maisha said, there's been a lot of information shared, so we did just want to take a pause and reflect on the information that has been shared. Congratulations to all of our presenters thus far. So we are going to do a brief Mentimeter activity. So you can scan the QR code. I'm seeing that we already have some folks in, which is great. I've also popped the link in the chat that you can paste into your browser. And so I'll give you another minute or so to get in, and then we will proceed to just 2 reflection questions. And if you're having any issues accessing the chat, please feel free, or accessing Menti, please feel free to pop your comments in the chat if you're comfortable. The physical activity advocate in me is also encouraging you to take a standing break if you need to, because we're looking forward to continuing our program after this quick reflection. All right, so you have heard a lot of information thus far, from scene setting to policy progress to reflections on the challenges but also successes in policy implementation. So it'd be great to hear a reflection on what you've heard so far. What's resonated with you? What is something that surprised you? Something that you think could be applicable to your country, you'd like to see implemented in your country? It can be a one-word response, or it can be a specific reflection that you have. Okay, so we're seeing pretty positive responses so far. It's been pretty informative, excellent. The taxes, the importance of political will. Definitely. Messaging, great advances are being seen in the region. Yeah, that's why we really wanted to facilitate this conversation, because some really great things are happening and it's important that we have a discussion about it. Collective action, collaboration, sugar is killing us, and I guess that links to the policy progress. So related to messaging, the importance of framing. I appreciate the intervention of the local levels, and we're going to hear some more about that shortly. Level of diabetes in Trinidad, and I'm sure other countries maybe felt the same from Miriam's presentation. Monitoring and evaluation is key. Excellent. Okay, great. Moral clarity. Relationships of science and politics for policy development. More work to be done to reduce sugar consumption in schools. Excellent. Okay, excellent reflections. Keep those coming, and we welcome additional comments in the chat. Thanks to all for this. And another question, and then I will hand it back over to Maisha. So what are some local policies or initiatives that promote, facilitate healthier school food environments? Because we're going to hop into focusing on school food environment shortly. What are some things that are happening in your country? It would be great to... Water Wednesday, great. And I know some of them, some of these initiatives are led by the ministry, some of them in collaboration with civil society organizations, some of them are youth-led. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts. Food vendor education, restrictions. You can feel free to also pop the country in, the country that you're referencing to for clarity. Backyard school gardens, excellent. And the Water Wednesday, Fruit Fridays, that seems to be one initiative that has taken off across the region, which is really exciting. School tours giving information to students and parents, cutting out sale of sugary drinks, encourage parents to do healthier meals, taxes on sugar beverages, school vending, promoting backyard and school gardens. Okay, excellent. Really great to see the backyard gardening. I know there was a peak and it was something that was explored across the region. Then we had a dip, but I'm glad to see that that's something that is being considered across the region. Okay, excellent, everyone. Hopefully you had your standing break. Feel free to continue to take that break, and I'm going to turn it back over to Maisha to lead us through the program. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Danielle, and thanks for all of you who engaged in the Mentimeter. Love to hear your feedback. So as Danielle said, now we're switching to look at the school environment. And we're going to hear from 3 countries. We're going to hear from Barbados, we're going to hear from Jamaica, and we're going to hear from Trinidad and Tobago. From Barbados, we're going to hear from Ms. Nicole Elliott. She's the Education Officer with responsibility for implementation of the school nutrition policy in Barbados. Then we're going to hear from Dr. Tamar Stevenson. He's the Education Officer in the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information in Jamaica. And then finally, we're going to hear from Dr. Lawrence Jai Singh, who is the Director in the Health Policy and Research and Planning Unit in the Ministry of Health in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm going to invite Nicole to share her slides and begin her presentation. Thank you, Nicole.
Are you seeing my slides or my slide notes?
We're seeing your notes.
Okay, hold a minute.
So while Nicole pulls up her slides, I wanted to say that Nicole has been a real asset in Barbados. She has experience from the advocacy perspective. She's also a teacher in schools, and now she's a dedicated person in the Ministry of Health, really oversighting the school nutrition policy implementation. So a real demonstration of prioritization from the Ministry of Education. Over to you, Nicole. I see your slides are up and ready to go.
All right. So good morning, everyone. As Maisha said, I'm Nicole Elliott, and I am the Education Officer for Barbados School Nutrition Policy at the Ministry of Education in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Barbados. So just a background rationale, and I'm probably going to go pretty quick, but I'll make the slides available if you want. So a little bit of background. Barbados has been facing a burden of childhood obesity, just like, I guess, majority of the other Caribbean countries. We have just gotten a report update on our percentage now. We have about 40% of our children being overweight, obese. School nutrition policy, as we can see now, alone will not work. We also need legislation because our policy is, as it says, a policy. It's not legislated yet as a law. The food choices are influenced by the community vendors, which is a very wide part of our ecosystem in our schools and in our school environments. So we follow the similar frameworks to across the CARICOM countries and the region, which is WHO, the PAHO, the CARICOM, and the Barbados School Nutrition Policy, our implementation draft for our framework on how we will implement. So school community food interference. So for our students, they will interface and purchase foods before, during, and after dismissal. During school, they purchase from within the school because we have what we call canteen concessionaires in secondary schools, and in schools, in primary schools have vendors that sell snacks and beverages. Within our schools, we have a complete ban of sugar-sweetened beverages, so we don't have that issue with sugar-sweetened beverages. However, we have the issue now with processed food, processed snacks, and that being the forefront. Water is not an issue. We have one of the issues that we had at the beginning, but we don't have that issue anymore per se. So, as the role of the vendor in Barbados, about 2 weeks ago, our minister had with Partnership Foundation and Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health, we had a collaborative vendor orientation for all vendors who stay outside of schools and sell outside of schools. And coming out of that, we recognize that the vendors that we have outside of our school is such a social cultural part of our society that trying to remove them it's not something that will happen overnight, or maybe never happen at all right away, but we may have to be able to work with them to do those things. So many vendors that operate, they identified that they had limited resources, making the health transition was challenging without support, and it represented to us that we needed to then work with them to help them to be able to meet the requirements that we needed because they were not able to meet those on their own. So the barriers that they faced, one of the things that they talked about, which was very interesting, was that they spoke about even trying to sell healthy items, then they have the competition of the ultra-processed foods that they are faced with. So even when they have the healthy items in their trays, the students now seeing maybe a shop down the road, which is a permanent structure, having the ultra-processed foods, then is more appealing to the students, and then those students being able then to purchase those items instead of the healthy items. And in truth, because they're there to make money, they decide, well, hey, if somebody else is doing it, I'm going to revert back because I also need to make money to be able to feed my family as well. So then we keep having that cycle of try, then go back to what you was doing, try, and then go back to what you're doing. And at this point, I think for both sides of the situation, it's getting a bit tiring. So we do need to have that partnership and support with private sector, especially the vendors who sell outside of schools. So private sector opportunities to work together and to align. We have found that our wholesalers and our distributors here on island have been very receptive. At the beginning, they weren't as receptive as they are now, but we have found that because we have been able to promote, and not through any marketing to children in schools, but promote them as an option to schools in terms of the alternatives that they have. So we have found that our manufacturers and our retailers that we have and wholesalers, they have been now seeking us out to be able to say, hey, we're going to do a product, and that product is now going to be based on the school nutrition policy, or we're going to import a different product, which is similar to what we sell now, but this one is going to be geared towards schools only. And so we found that that has been working well. We actually had companies who have actually created a specific water, a flavored water, that speaks to the requirements specifically set out in our school nutrition policy. And they have now have that as the school approved flavored water for schools. And it took a while for us to get the formulation going on that, but they were able to come through on that as well. We also have manufacturers who, because milk is something that is very popular here on island, and we haven't been able to have it on the list of our alternatives for a very long time, because and vendors weren't able to sell it in schools because of the sugar content. And so we have a local manufacturer who stepped in and decided that they're going to start reducing the sugar. We are now down to 4 grams in sugar content to an 8-ounce bottle. And so over the next 2 years, the plan is to reduce it down to as far as we can, trying to keep it as palatable as possible for the children still, so that they don't lose the sales, and that we don't lose the interest of the milk to the children. So a case example for our vendors, we came up with, at the end of the session, the companies that were present there at the orientation and the manufacturers and wholesalers decided that one of the ways that they will be able to make some of the changes to suit the individual vendors is for us as a ministry to come together and create a vendor cooperative, where instead of one person coming to them to try to get a sale on an item or to try to get a particular product brought in, no, it will be the 100+ of them coming together as one to be able to make a purchase, which will make the buying power of them a little bit better than if one of them somebody comes individually over a period of time trying to get a particular product. So if this would have helped us to be able to reduce the barriers. So what we have seen so far is that we had an issue with coolers, water chillers, and so once companies were not able to sell sugar sweetened beverages anymore, they would have taken away the coolers from the vendors and the canteen concessionaires. Now with the influx of water being sold in schools, we have distributors now coming back and saying, okay, we're going to brand our coolers with water, and we will allow you to, they had a stipulation before where persons couldn't put other products in their coolers, and so that's why they removed them. Now they're telling us we will allow them to use the first 3 shelves for our product, and the other 2 shelves they can put other products, whether it's products for their preparation of food or if it's products from another company that does not have a chiller that they can use. And so we have agreed through the cooperative that we are trying to form that we will have that opportunity for them. And so they have sent out the flyers to replace for all schools who need chillers to place water. They will have those, and water must be placed on the first 3 shelves, and other products that are on the alternative list can go on the last 2 shelves as part of their plan to help us execute this vendor issue that we have on island. So policy dilemma and the national priorities, we would have approach from the National NCD Strategic Plan, Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Education, Health and Family Life Education goals, and we are trying to get someone to rewrite that to suit our context here on island. The Ministry of Health and Wellness, school-based prevention strategies, and we also have Heart and Stroke Foundation, Barbados Childhood Obesity Coalition, but who does the Cool School Tours, and we are now about to launch with the Cool School Tour a sampling project where we get to introduce new foods, our local Caribbean foods, in terms of produce and fruits and vegetables and products that are more suited for that, to be able to do so.
Nicole,
as it relates,
quick, just note to wrap up if you can. We're kind of behind on time. Thank you.
Yes, please. So the implications for our policy practice is that schools must be positioned as a shared societal to share the societal responsibility. Ministries, vendors, and private sector actors and communities must collaborate. That's what we have seen thus far, and that the whole society approach enhances the policy impact and the equity and the sustainability of the policy, and Barbados can serve as a model for integrating school nutrition in action as it relates to our alternative snacks and beverages list and our work with our manufacturers and companies thus far. That is it for me.
Thank you, Nicole. That was excellent. Thanks for a real close look at the Barbados experience. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move very quickly on to our next presenter, Dr. Tamar Stevenson. I believe you're still sharing your screen, Nicole.
I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you. And I said earlier, Dr. Tamar Stevenson is the Education Officer at the Ministry of Education in Jamaica, who's been leading on the implementation of the school nutrition policy in Jamaica. Dr. Stevenson, we can see your slides, just ready for presentation mode, and then over to you. Perfect. Please go ahead. Your mic is muted. Great.
Great. So, good morning, everyone. I am Tamar Stevenson, Senior Education Officer here in the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information. So, what I'm going to briefly be sharing with you is Jamaica's National School Nutrition Policy. This document is a joint effort between the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the Ministry of Education, Skills, Youth, and Information. But separating apart from that, though, we would have included a number of other ministries, departments, and agencies. So one of the key ministries that I am going to be focusing on is the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, and Mining. And it's important that we have to understand that school nutrition is not limited to schools. It depends on national systems working together, and that is why Jamaica has leveraged partnership, especially with the Ministry of Agriculture, to connect food production with school feeding, supporting both nutrition outcomes and local economic development. And that is why beyond the school gate, we have partnered with the Ministry of Agriculture. We have done the linking of local agriculture to school feeding program. And there is also the campaign where we eat what we grow and grow what we eat. But separating apart from that too is that through the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Mining, with support from RADA, which is the Rural Agriculture Development Authority, we have established what we call a reliable supply of locally grown food. We want to ensure that there is consistent access to nutritious and locally grown food. Support also extend beyond supply to include strengthening production and marketing system. Separating apart from that, though, there is small farmers who are also included, because we have to understand and recognize that the school in and of itself is a community. And when we have our local farmers on board, they are able to supply the school with, that type of ground provision, while at the same time encouraging economic activities at that level. So production is aligned to the school feeding demand. There is also technical support that is also provided by the Ministry of Agriculture. And of course, there is sustainable, locally driven feeding system, such as our school garden, because what we have found is that when we include the schools, when we include the school garden, it helps to offset some of the costs associated with the provision of the type of food, the healthy food that we want to have in the school environment. And so our school feeding unit has been quite instrumental in terms of working with the Ministry of Agriculture as well as RADA and through the 4-H Club to, get the school gardening back up. A number of our schools, would have lost their garden as a result of Hurricane Beryl and Hurricane Melissa. And so what we have been doing is that we have been working closely with the Ministry of Agriculture as well as those at the local level in ensuring that we get the gardens up and running. But as it pertains to equity, access, and sustainability, though, what we have recognized too is that especially those schools in the rural areas often have advantages in access to produce, while urban schools face, constraints. And so what the government have done is to ensure that there's equity through structured supply chain, school garden programs, and innovative solutions like greenhouse farming. And so greenhouse farming is a critical component of our approach in ensuring that there is sustainability and, irrespective of where the schools are located, whether it is within the rural context or the urban context, we have to improvise. And separating apart from that, the Ministry of Education, in support from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, we have recognized that, this is something that we can't do alone. And that is why the Ministry of Agriculture has been a critical partner and will continue to be a critical partner in this process, because equity and access to nutritious meal is something that is pivotal. We want to also ensure that the school garden and those that have greenhouse farming, they're sustainable. And that is why the ministry have been implementing and will continue to implement the policy on a phased basis in ensuring that we reach all of our schools and ensure that the schools continue to have access to nutritious meal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. Really illustrating the importance of partnerships, that no ministry can implement these policies on their own. So Dr. Jai Singh had to leave for another meeting because we're running a little bit behind. We're hoping that he can jump back on shortly. And now you're going to hear from me, and I'm going to speed through my presentation because we are behind time. And essentially what my presentation focuses on is just a quick update on action on commercial determinants of health in Caribbean SIDS. And you would have heard a bit about commercial determinants of health, the definition from Dr. Giraldo earlier, so I'm going to skip this slide and go into this slide. And you also had a bit of a slide on this slide as well, but I wanted to reinforce that there are 4 sectors, 4 industries that drive 1/3 of global deaths. When we think about commercial determinants of NCDs, this is what we're thinking about, the tremendous burden. And you also heard about the SIDS Declaration, Bridgetown Declaration from Dr. Giraldo, but I wanted to pull out some really strong language that came from this declaration, and it's the only political document we have globally now which is so plainly and starkly recognizes the impact of commercial determinants. So commercial and economic determinants of health, including trade, are among the key drivers of NCDs and mental health conditions in SIDS. So really setting the scene and emphasizing how powerful these drivers are. Addressing commercial and economic determinants of NCDs and mental health conditions is vital for sustainable development. And so bringing you back to Dr. Giraldo's slide, all of these the red areas that we have and the lack of progress really are related to regulating these actors, regulating these industries. And you heard some of the experiences around industry opposition from Minister Tufton, and you've also heard from some of our other presenters. So what has been the regional response? Well, we've had regulation. We heard about the special consumption tax in Jamaica from Minister Tufton. Belize last year introduced a school nutrition policy. Trinidad, and we hopefully will still hear from Trinidad around their new school nutrition, their revised school nutrition policy. And Jamaica also, you heard from Dr. Stevenson, introduced a national school nutrition policy. This is not exhaustive, but really a scan from the last year, so there is progress. We also wanted to highlight that when we speak about commercial determinants of health, there it's not only the negative impacts, there are also positive impacts. And in the region, we have commercial actors who have been actively supporting NCD regulation. This is a regional insurance company, Sagicor Life Inc., and they encouraged private sector actors to stop marketing unhealthy foods and beverages to children. They were also very active and vocal in their support for octagonal warning labels. In the national standards process, when we were deliberating front-of-package warning labeling across the region from Barbados, there was a private sector actor who maintained support for octagonal warning labels. And this is outside of the area of food policy, but Scotiabank and the Trinidad and Tobago Cancer Society have been partnering for a few years now around vaping, preventing vaping amongst young people. So commercial actors have a really important role to play in supporting NCD regulation. So back to what do we see in terms of updates. In terms of convening and capacity building, HCC hosted a meeting back in October 2025, a regional meeting. It was jointly hosted by HCC, PAHO, and Global Health Advocacy Incubator. There was high-level engagement at this meeting with leadership from PAHO, CARPHA, OECS Commission, CARICOM Secretariat, and we had opening remarks from ministers of health and wellness, but also Minister of Labor and the third sector, really again illustrating this recognition that this is not an issue that sits only within health. It's an issue that cuts across sectors. We had almost 100 attendees. It was cross-cutting in terms of private sector, civil society, and public sector. And there was a really concrete outcome of developing tools to help to support the management of conflicts of interest and overall strengthen governance. There's also, we're seeing a widening of political support at the recent high-level meeting on NCDs held in September 2025. One of the opening remarks from the Honorable Prime Minister Philip Davis of the Bahamas at a CARICOM side event really underscored the importance of addressing commercial determinants. He said the regulation of harmful commercial practices is not a luxury, it is a protection of our citizens, and we must confront the commercial forces driving diseases. Back to that regional meeting, again, when we see policymakers really being very direct and vocal about the impact of commercial activities, you really can see that we're making progress. And these are some headlines in local newspapers following the opening comments from then Minister Walcott. Caribbean urged to confront corporate power. Health policies at risk. And I've extracted a comment from his opening remarks here. Colleagues, commercial determinants of health are amongst the most powerful and complex drivers of disease in our time. If left unchecked, they will continue to erode the health gains we have made. The path forward requires courage, collaboration, and clarity of purpose. There's also been progress in development of tools and policies to support strengthened governance. And I want to congratulate Kaj and her team, really applaud the Bahamas in the Health and Promotion Wellness Act. And PAHO worked on them with the government of Bahamas on this extraordinary piece of legislation which speaks very pointedly to management and safeguarding against conflicts of interest, and it is one of the only in the world. So we have in our region a real example of best practice that we can adopt across the region. This is a tool HCC launched last year to help to manage donations from the commercial sector in times of emergencies and outside of emergencies. This is a roadmap for, again, helping member states to develop policies to manage conflicts of interest, and this was presented at our meeting in October, and many member states expressed an interest to begin in this work. And finally, in terms of tools, this is not a very recent document. It was launched in 2024, and it looks at the standardization program which was then happening for front-of-package warning labeling, but really takes a broader look at public health decision-making architecture in the region and makes recommendations around areas to strengthen the governance and prevent entry points for industry interference. We've also used as a tool, and we heard about this from very few speakers, the importance of building public awareness, building public support, and these are some of the mass media campaigns we've had across the region and also at national level. These are regional campaigns. This is a national campaign in Barbados, a national campaign in Jamaica. This is a sneak peek at a campaign we're about to release around marketing of unhealthy products in schools. So again, the importance of building campaigns, and we heard from Minister Tufton and also Mr. Toro about changing the narrative, getting the public on board, and these campaigns, that's really the aim of those campaigns. So in summary, the key takeaways, as we have heard, there are gaps that persist. We need tools. We've seen progress, though. There are best practice models which do exist in the region. Finally, but there is urgency. And progress, we know now, is not achievable without robust policies to prevent conflict of interest and industry interference. So that's the quick update on commercial determinants of health. I'm just going to ask Danielle very quickly if we do have the honor of having Dr. Jai Singh back. If not, we will move on to a question and answer session?
Maisha, I think we can move to the Q&A.
Thank you. Okay, so you've heard a lot this morning, many presentations. Unfortunately, Mr. Toro and I believe Minister Tufton have left, but we've seen some questions in the chat as well as in the Q&A. And I'm going to, and some have already been answered, but a few have not. I wanted to note that the webinar will be recorded, as with all of our webinars, and it will be available on HCC's website. I'm going to invite the panelists to turn their cameras back on so that we can proceed with this brief 10-minute Q&A. And I'm going to start the first question with Dr. Alvarado. And the question is, how is the success of taxation measured? Have you seen a diminish in the consumption of SSBs?
Sure, thank you for the question. So overall, systematic reviews have looked at the ways that SSB taxes impact price and sales and found a really consistent and substantial impact when we summarize that evidence. We've also found the same finding in Barbados using data from a major supermarket chain. So following the 10% tax, like I mentioned, we saw that increase in price and we saw the statistically significant decline in sales. We have not been in a position to estimate changes in consumption or other health outcomes. So in that sense, we're reliant on modeling and evidence from other settings to fill in the blanks where we don't have the data or haven't yet been able to complete those analyses. I'll put a little bit more detail in response to that question in the chat as well. So thanks very much for raising that question.
Thanks, Mary. One more question for you, which I think you did answer in the chat, but maybe for the benefit of the wider group, why did sales increase after the SSB tax implementation? And maybe, I don't know if you can summarize that, because I know it can be quite complex, but you did indicate that, so I think some of those listening may be interested in the response.
Sure, absolutely. So that evaluation is being finalized as we speak. So while we did find that certain kinds of SSBs decreased substantially and with statistical significance, so like sweetened dairies, energy and sports drinks, the finding with sodas was more complicated. And we did a really systematic assessment of, I think, something like 15 or 16 different potential explanations. We found some indicative evidence that there's two explanations for this weird finding with sodas. So one is that a major local manufacturer might have been able to keep prices of sodas a bit lower. And so we didn't see the price bump for that particular portfolio of sodas. And so so then people don't have an incentive to reduce their consumption or purchasing of that product. The WHO says that ad valorem or value-based SSB taxes are more likely to favor local manufacturers just because of the nature of their design, and or to also favor lower cost products. And this is kind of getting into like the nuts and bolts and the weeds of tax design and implications. But our findings are consistent with this, and the recommendation coming out of our evaluation would be to transition from a tax that's based on value to a tax that's based on volume or total sugar content. And this would really like kind of close that loophole or fill that kind of gap or leaky part of the tax design. So I just want to emphasize that the finding we're coming to is that the tax as an instrument can work, but that the details of the tax design can be strengthened in ways that kind of close this loophole and increase the effectiveness of the policy.
Thanks, Mary.
A second explanation, sorry, Maisha, just really quickly, is that we also found evidence that there was an industry-led kind of coalition putting out messages a few months after the tax rate increase was announced. And we heard about industry responses. This is one that we've seen multiple times and in multiple settings. And the campaign included messages like balance what you eat, drink, and do, everything in moderation. And as I mentioned earlier, these drinks many times are really empty calories. There is no place for them at the levels they're being consumed in a healthy diet. So this is a misleading message that might have driven demand for sodas in particular.
Thanks, Miriam. I think that's a really good point that you add. It reminds me of Mr. Toro's intervention when he talked about the simplicity of the narrative and the need for us as advocates to be very simple and clear, because the industry narrative is often very clear and very simple. Balance what you eat, for example. So we're going to close the Q&A session just now so we can move on to our final panel. But I want to just remind panelists that there are some questions in the Q&A still that are unanswered. Miriam or Kaj, you might want to take a stab at the question around the barriers to promoting healthy eating, including costs of healthy foods. And there are a few others. So I now would like to invite our final moderator for our final panel, Ms. Sheena Warner-Edwards. She is our Communications Officer at the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, and she's going to take you through the final panel of the session. Over to you, Sheena. Sheena, your mic is muted.
Yeah, something popped up. Morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you, Maisha, for the introductions. Of course, I am Sheena Warner-Edwards, the Communication Officer with the ACC. And for this session, we are going to explore actionable recommendations to accelerate policy progress, including the application of innovative research approaches and findings. We have about 5 panelists, and I will introduce them in order as they will present. We have Miss Janae Farrell, who is new to the ACC team. She is our project officer. We have Dr. Suzanne Suarez-Winter, and she is a clinical nutritionist at the Caribbean Institute for Health Research. We also have Miss Lisa Braffett-Green, and she is the Medical and Health Services Administrator at the Insurance Corporation of Barbados Limited. We have Miss Abigail Caleb. She is the Senior Technical Officer, Food and Security and Nutrition at the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA, as you would know. And then we also have Miss Samantha Moye. I think she's on, yes. She is the Chief Nutrition Officer at the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Environment and Civil Service Affairs in Antigua and Barbuda. Welcome, all ladies. And as we begin, Janae is going to delve into meaningful engagement of civil society organizations, youth, as well as persons living with NCDs. And for Janae, I'm going to pose the question, why is it critical for civil society and importantly, youth and people living with NCDs to be actively involved in the policy-making process? It's going to be a 2-part question, but I will let her proceed with the first question.
Thank you, Sheena, and hello, everyone. Please let me know if at any point you can't hear me well. All good? Okay.
All good.
Right. So, civil society plays a critical role in policymaking because it represents the voices, interests, and realities of everyday people. Beyond government, the public sector, and business, the private sector, civil society, that third sector of society, is often a bridge between communities and decision makers, particularly for people living with NCDs and for youth who are directly affected by these policies. Beyond involving civil society in policymaking, they must be meaningfully engaged. This means moving beyond informing them after decisions are already made or consulting them only for specific projects or meetings. It means embedding civil society, youth, and people living with NCDs into formal decision-making processes, from policy development through implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. This is especially important in our context, as we've seen NCDs continue to place a significant burden on our health systems, economies, and communities. Policies cannot be effective if they are disconnected from the lived realities of the people they are intended to serve. People living with NCDs understand firsthand what it's like to navigate a health system. They understand the barriers to accessing services, medication, mental health supports, healthy foods, and they understand the stigma and hidden costs associated with NCDs. They carry the direct burden of gaps within health systems and wider social policies, and this experience brings a level of clinical expertise and data alone cannot provide. Youth involvement is equally many NCD risk factors, and more young people are living with NCDs themselves, navigating what we understand as old people disease. Young people are facing unhealthy food environments, aggressive digital marketing, and social pressures in real time. At the same time, they will inherit the long-term consequences of policy decisions we make today. Ultimately, meaningful engagement means we're moving policymaking from something done for people to something developed with people. And that shift is essential for advancing NCD policies that are effective, people-centered, and reflective of the realities across our communities.
Great. Thank you, Janae. And another very important aspect for us, I guess, at ACC and in general, we always encourage in the space, if you're meaningfully engaging young people and persons living with NCDs in the space, which we always advocate for, they should definitely have a seat at the table. So from the beginning to the end, just at the end. I will also invite Janae to answer another question or to share with us, how HCC has involved or currently supporting meaningful engagement in decision-making spaces.
Okay. So HCC is helping to build first a shared understanding of what meaningful engagement looks like or should look like in the Caribbean context. Right now, HCC is leading several regional exercises focused on strengthening the meaningful engagement of youth, including young people living with NCDs and NCD-related policymaking. This includes developing practical guidance and tailored resources for both institutions and for youth. So there's a clear and mutual understanding of the principles, expectations, enabling conditions for meaningful engagements, as well as the common barriers and practical strategies to overcome them. ACC is also mapping existing NCD decision-making mechanisms across the region to identify where civil society engagements already exist, where gaps are, and what opportunities there are to better institutionalize participation. Ultimately, the goal is to support systems where engagement is not treated as optional or symbolic, but is a sustained structural part of how policy is made, implemented, and evaluated, so that no decision is truly made without the people that it affects.
Fantastic. Thank you, Janae. Next up, we have Dr. Susan Winters. So part of the discussion, you've heard so much today with respect to what has been done in the policy space, what can be done, to accelerate the policy implementation process. In the Caribbean, unfortunately, we have been called out for, the slow or very, very slow rate with respect to implementing these policies that have been recommended. And as you have seen today, lots of evidence has shown they have worked in other jurisdictions and worked quite well. So a major part of that is the research component. And Dr. Suzanne Suarez-Winters will now share with us, the types of data and evidence which are currently missing but are critical for driving stronger, faster policy decisions on a priority policies. And she will also share, the team or others in the network who are currently working in that space. And she has quite a lot to share. There are a lot of youth as well that are doing quite remarkable work in the area.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. I hope you can hear me, right? No, sorry. All right, so, in the Caribbean, we have to recognize that we're undergoing a major transformation in our health and food systems, just requiring that evidence-based decision-making process. And we have a lot of policies, so school nutrition policies, fiscal policies, issues around our food labeling standards, marketing restrictions. And so what we need in the Caribbean are really up-to-date, very localized, actionable data and disaggregated equity-based data. And given the lack of resources that we have, and just because we have to have a collective approach, is to make sure that we have methods that are standardized or harmonized for comparability across the region. And so some of the immediate data needs just for what is happening here is we definitely need to continue our recognizing dietary intake patterns. Those are continuing to change. Food environment audits, monitoring of just the food spaces, not just in schools, but in health settings. We need to look at just food marketing and food quality. We have to look at interventions around behaviors, eating behaviors, because we have already developed a lot of the information in terms of tracking what the disease food and disease process is like. We need to look at interventions, data linking local food production or trade, dietary outcomes, purchasing patterns. We have to recognize that we're in a space where we have rapid climate change, we're at constant exposure to natural disasters. We have a war in the Middle East going on now. And all of those things will impact our exposures. And so we need to look at that kind of high quality analysis of that burden. And, so without these data, it's hard to set baselines or model future risks and justify just the the urgency of these data, as well as, trying to lay out the industry responses. Now, in terms of what we are doing currently, we have a wide array of researchers and civil society that we work with, ministries of education, and a very dedicated group of graduate students now building on available evidence in the global space, but also trying to contextualize what our differences are regionally. So we do have regional differences, cultural differences. And one of the things that we are focusing on now is really just looking at the digital space, because that's a huge impact for us, and it does help us to realize that we need to have that kind of youth-centric approach to how we develop and design policies. So we're looking at the impact of food labels, digital space, health settings, food insecurity, just to see how it impacts food purchasing patterns, food perceptions, behaviors, and just our understanding of these things. I know that's a mouthful within the time.
Mouthful, but excellent information. Because as you know, again, and as you have highlighted, research is the backbone, I guess, for any of our projects, any of our campaigns. We usually start with the basis of the research. And the evidence has, as you said, I mean, we are one Caribbean, but there's some level of difference, as we go across the region, and especially with respect to our nutrition. What we eat, what we drink, what we propose to eat, there's still some slight differences across the region. So all excellent information. So now we will move on. So for this session, this part of the segment, we'll look at the barriers, but also some of the things that some of our partners, I would say, have been doing in this space. And this would include our private sector arms and what we would call our health positive companies. And one of those companies has been the Insurance Corporation of Barbados Limited, who we've known for many, many years in this space, especially with respect to implementing campaigns as well as health initiatives. And in this particular case, we would have highlighted, the recent efforts by the ICBL, as they locally call, in the space of childhood nutrition and childhood obesity prevention. And for this, we have Ms. Rafik Graham, so Lisa. She's here with us, and she will speak to how ICBL has demonstrated a tangible support for advancing healthy school environments and ultimately the development of children. So open to the floor to Lisa.
Thank you, Sheena. Good morning to everyone. I want to start by saying that healthy school nutrition policies require enabling environments in order to succeed. Children do not make decisions in isolation. Their behaviors, habits, attitude towards food, physical activity, and overall well-being are all influenced by the environments around them every single day. ICBL is an insurance company operating in Barbados, and through our corporate social responsibility initiatives, we have invested in youth development for many years because the development of our children is important to the future and well-being of Barbados. Our contribution has ranged from hands-on staff involvement to financial sponsorship of programs that support children and youth development. One significant initiative was called PE Takeover, where we visited schools across the country and took over PE sessions to remind students that health and wellness is an important pillar in their lives. For over 3 years, I have had the honor of conducting a health presentation on obesity, nutrition, and the importance of physical activity at a rural primary school during their health fair. at ICBL, we understand that these types of engagements help to create enabling environments for our children by reinforcing healthy behaviors early and making health and wellness visible, interactive, and relatable. ICBL is also, as you said, the proud sponsor of schools and youth initiatives across the island. We contribute to wellness in this country. We also know that we can contribute positively, and we do this via the enabling environment. We help create that enabling environment, and we will continue to do so. Now, we do that also through learning initiatives such as our National Junior Spelling Bee competition. You might have heard of Pontification and Poetry. We support the mental math competition and book drives through our schools. These initiatives encourage literacy, confidence building, creativity, learning, and positive engagement. We also help create enabling environments through physical activity, through our sponsorship of the Barbados Secondary Schools Athletic Championship, where ICBL served as a Gold Plus sponsor, as well as providing support for athletes progressing toward the CARPHA competition. These initiatives encourage movement, discipline, teamwork, resilience, and positive participation among young people. Today, as a company, ICBL will continue to stand in support of our children because we understand that little stones build big buildings, and our little ones will build our big futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Excellent. And I definitely have seen ICBL in motion, and they're one of those companies that when you call on them for anything, which is children related, adult related, and what is health focused, they are ready and they are there and willing. So I thank you for that. Now we turn over, we'll be looking now at our regional but yet local, support. And in that, we welcome CARPHA, so the Caribbean Public Health Agency, which has supported several regional frameworks and technical guidance, over the last, I would have to say, 10 years in this space. So I welcome Abigail. So Abigail Caleb will present on the CARPHA 6-point policy package, which you probably have heard about, as well as their recent technical recommendations for the development of nutrition standards for Caribbean schools. And Abigail, your question will be, how can countries and stakeholders practically use your frameworks to accelerate national level policy implementation? And how has CARPHA supported accelerating action?
Thank you very much for those questions, Sheena. In response to your first, countries and stakeholders can use CARPHA's frameworks as a ready-made blueprint to accelerate national policy. Of note, you would have mentioned is the CARPHA Curriculum 6-point policy package, 6PPP, which is a regional framework implemented in 2017 to tackle childhood obesity through 6 policy areas. In December 2025, CARPHA, in collaboration with the Pan American Health Organization, published the technical recommendations for the development of nutrition standards for Caribbean schools, which actually directly supports 6PPP policy point number 2, and it provides technical guidance in 5 key areas of school nutrition. So the frameworks and technical guidance that are developed by CARPHA, they can and are in fact being used in several practical ways. 1, direct national adoption or adoption. We have the examples of Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts and Nevis that are currently in the process of using the CARPHA PAHO technical recommendations to build national school nutrition standards. 2, the frameworks and guidelines are used to strengthen existing policies, such as in Dominica, Grenada, and St. Lucia, that had existing national school nutrition policies, but through the use of the CARPHA PAHO technical recommendations, are now in the process of revising it and strengthening it in order to ensure an enabling environment within their schools. 3, all of CARPHA's frameworks and technical guidance are evidence-based. So we have done the work, so countries do not need to start from scratch. And fourth, these frameworks help to guide multi-sector action. So countries can use them to align health, education, agriculture, and trade ministries. So quite useful. Now, in terms of your second question, CARPHA acts as a regional catalyst in 4 key areas. So CARPHA develops and publishes regional guidance. We have the 6 PPP, the technical recommendations for the development of nutrition standards for Caribbean schools. You might have heard of the CASA regional framework for sodium reduction, recipe books, among many others. CARPHA also provides technical support and training from front of package warning labels to national school nutrition policies and guidelines to the policy development for the elimination of industrially produced trans fatty acids and even national food and nutrition surveillance systems using the DHIS2 platform. CARPHA also coordinates and monitors regional action by leading the 6-point policy package into agency technical committee to monitor and coordinate implementation. And we also help to build evidence and convene stakeholders. So the bottom line, Sheena, is that CARPHA gives countries the science, the tools, and the coordination to move from idea to national policy, law, or program, and to do so much faster. Countries can plug our frameworks into their national processes, and CARPHA supports them through training, data systems, and multi-sector coordination. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abigail, and that has been very excellent. We've seen so many examples, especially recently. We've worked with CARPHA actually on a number of webinars and also to do a number of presentations across the region and how, countries utilize this, especially the 6-point policy package always comes up, how they're utilizing that to implement various programs, strategies, and so locally it's quite evident. And in that case, we want to invite Ms. Samantha Moy, and she will speak to the Antigua and Barbuda examples, some of the policy work that is happening there. We've been working with them, very closely, especially on the SSB tax, looking at what that will look like. We've heard from Dr. Miriam Alvarado as to, what has worked, how it can be improved. So we work quite closely with the Ministry of Health and Wellness there in Antigua and Barbuda. And Samantha will now showcase, how she has worked closely with policymakers on healthy food policies, as well as share with us, what do you think policymakers need most to accelerate the implementation of those policies?
Good morning, and thank you, Sheena. Good morning to those online. So with regards to Antigua and Barbuda's experience, especially most recently with the sugar-sweetened beverage policy, we would have had to engage with quite a few policymakers. And just to give you a quick rundown of who, so we had Ministry of Health, Ministry of Legal Affairs, Inland Revenue, Education, Customs and Excise, and then the cabinets of Antigua and Barbuda. So what has worked is that, and I'm glad that Abigail mentioned this, was preparing a policy brief, and that ideally should be data driven. And I heard my other colleague spoke to research. So making sure that that policy brief that you're going to share with your policymakers is data driven, because they're going to ask for this. Another important element is early engagement with your policymakers. And I find starting with your home ministry and branching outwards works best. So in our case, I would have started with the Ministry of Health, making sure that the Chief Medical Officer, the Permanent Secretary, and of course the Minister is well informed. And the Minister is quite important in this process, because at some point, he would have to take this back to his cabinet. So that's why that policy brief and engaging them early is important. Once we have engaged the Home Ministry, we branch outwards now to the other policy makers. We would send the document for their review and then engage them in usually face-to-face or online meetings, where we use the opportunity to review the particulars, especially relating to their department. Including in this meeting is also the use of best practices and technical guidance, whether from PAHO, CARPHA, OECS, we've done that in the past, and also to share the success stories of similar policies in the region. I find that has helped as well. What also is important is to include strategic partners as a part of this conversation. So we would have engaged PAHO as a part of these policymaker meetings, or now also our local CSOs like the Antigua and Barbuda Diabetes Association. Once all that is done, of course, we would have to make edits and so on. We'll circle back to the same group, and at the end have a policy document that you can work with, which is what Antigua has with regards to the sugar sweetened beverage policy. So to wrap up, data is important, having the political will, using the technical guidance already available, utilizing your multi-sectoral collaboration, and finally, once everything is ironed out, or most things ironed out, you have your public engagement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one thing, something that Samantha did not mention, but a good part of the policy focus for Antigua and Barbuda has been the mention, at least, of the utilization of the SSB tax, so whatever is collected, to feed back into the health promotion space. So again, that's one of those things that we would all advocate for. You know, if there are policies being implemented, you know, you can utilize the funding and so to support your health promotion activities on the ground. And that is one key point, because I don't think many countries have actually mentioned that, you know, in their outset, you know, that they will be utilizing the funding to support or feed back into their health initiatives. And now I would open the floor for a Q&A segment. I did see one or two questions pop up. You did answer one, and that would have been related to, you know, doing the same work, extending the work into the space in Guyana. And definitely we would love to see, we want to see the entire region, you know, implementing policies at a quicker pace. So that has been answered. I definitely, you know, persons are typing in the chat, but please feel free to also open your mic or raise your hand if you wish to ask any questions. I think all of our questions have been answered. Quiet. So what I will do is now open the floor then to our panelists to give one quick comment, query. We are all partners here. So please feel free, and I will start with Janae. Janae Farrell?
Hi, yes. My quick comment is that there are so many specialists on this call who participated, who presented, and I think the critical part is, how do we use all our strengths when it comes to the data that's being collected, what is being monitored and evaluated, and, you know, the different sectors of societies, whether it's youth, whether it's people living with NCDs, all these different groups, insurance as well, to really advance what we're trying to do, and it is to create a healthier population for all of us to have a healthier future. So just encouraging that teamwork and playing it at our strengths.
Thank you, Janae. So now move to Dr. Suzanne Suarez-Winter. One quick comment, observation that you want to share on reflection.
Yes, so, you know, just going back on what clearly we have a huge transformation of our health system and food environment and lots of policies and impacts. So it is very important for the region, yes, to create that harmonized approach, given that we're all affected but by the same things, but we're very different. So it's having that very collaborative and harmonized approach to how we're doing things, because that's how we're going to strengthen the development of policies and the sustainability of policies across the region. Because, you know, our collective experiences are also very important.
Excellent. Yes, that's very much so, very important for us. Again, there's quite a lot happening, but there's still room for a lot to be done. And yes, it can be overwhelming at times, for us working in the space, but we take it one day at a time, and we are definitely seeing some fruits of our labor, as we speak. Yeah, there's quite a lot happening in the media with respect to policy focus and policy shifts and what we're eating and and the cultural influence. So definitely quite a lot to be done, but we are moving, and that's the important thing. So I would also now invite we move to, I'm seeing Abigail on the screen. So I'll move to Abigail first. Yes, to give share a comment, a reflection, with respect to this panel discussion.
All right, thank you, Sheena. So here I would like to make a plug. There is much to be done, but there is also a lot that is happening within the region in various aspects of the different components of the 6 PPP. We have countries that have progressed to varying degrees. So I urge all countries, all our member states, to use the existing resources and networks that exist. So at CARPHA, we have the National Non-Communicable Diseases, Nutrition and Mental Health Focal Points Network. There's the HCC Healthy Schools Healthy Schools Nutrition Network. So tap into those. Collaborate, learn from the experiences of other member states and also with the support of the regional partners. So you do not necessarily have to start from scratch, but you can certainly make progress towards reducing childhood obesity.
Excellent, Abigail. And just want to share again and place in a plug as well. You can reach out to any member of our HCC team, and you can find us very easily. Even if you wish, if it's not on social media, if you wish to reach out to us through our website, which is www.healthycaribbean.org, we are always accessible. But yes, so you can reach out to us with any queries. If you're looking for particular documents, feel free, and we can share those with you as well. And I'll move quickly to our final comments, queries, reflections from Ms. Lisa Bradford-Green. Again, the involvement, we speak a lot about the whole of society approach, and this is a perfect example of what can be done when the private sector, comes on board and is working with us in the health space. So over to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Sheena. And I think you said it for me, because I think one of the most important things that I've experienced from being in this forum this morning is the important role of the private sector. And from a visionary perspective, I think I would like to see a framework almost where there are areas for the private sector to choose to be a part of. So we want to achieve this objective. Here's the infrastructure for you to support. And so as opposed to just leaving it arbitrarily for the private sector to choose, you actually channel the efforts to meet the objective. And I think ICBL naturally follows health and wellness, but there are other areas that can be supported. And I think if the infrastructure and framework were in place, then it becomes easier for the private sector to choose and engage. So I really appreciate the forum. Thank you so much for having us. We are very grateful for being able to contribute today. Thank you.
Thank you as well. I see a quick comment in the chat with respect to breastfeeding rates. And again, as I reflected today in the media, there are two countries, so Grenada and Guyana, who have literally just passed the PAHO, breastfeeding and breastfeeding rates and child nutrition for breast-friendly hospitals, which is the beginning of a step to remove, I have to say, there are several barriers, as has been highlighted by many persons with respect to breastfeeding and increasing breastfeeding rates. And we have to say kudos to the Ministry of Health Guyana, as well as the Ministry of Health in Grenada for staying the course and, following through to now have, I think in Guyana, there were about 4 or 5 hospitals that have passed, in terms of our breast-friendly hospitals, as we term it. And then in Grenada, same thing. We have our baby-friendly hospital, yes. And they're called, so then you have a breastfeeding environment. And what that entails is the removal of substitutes. So we encourage breastfeeding for all, and therefore, that across the board, we are working with a number of CSOs actually in various countries to push that forward. We have also paid maternity leave that has been extended in Barbados, as well as paid paternity leave in several of our countries. So yeah, and Dr. Natasha Stores is on. She said 8 hospitals. So that is fantastic. 8 hospitals in Guyana, which have now been certified as breast-friendly hospitals. So you're close with Samantha. So again, some reflections, in terms of, have a query, question?
Yeah, hi, Trent Tobago here. I hope you're hearing.
Yes.
Yes, sorry for I had another call. This is Lawrence Giles from Trent Tobago. I just want to extend this discussion thus far.
Okay, so what I'll do, I will allow Danielle is still on. So we'll close this section and then we'll move on. I'm happy that you were able to join us again. We figured that you did have to step away. So we'll close this. Samantha is going to share quickly, some reflections on the policy process that has been taking place in Antigua and Barbuda.
I just first want to echo the sentiments of my other colleagues online, but I cannot stress enough the importance of our ongoing collaboration. I think what has worked for Antigua is our ongoing collaboration, especially with these regional agencies such as HCC, PAHO, CARPHA, OECS, and the material, and not just human resources, yes, but material that you have gained. And as was said before, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. The information is there, the stories are there, the roadblocks are there, and it tends to be similar. So please don't try to do it alone, but reach out to your counterparts, and you definitely will get the help and encouragement that you need. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to this lovely and esteemed panel. We got persons in the chat going. So now I would turn back over to Maisha. We have one more presentation that we can definitely accommodate. Yes. So handing over to Maisha. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sheena, and thanks, panelists. We recognize we're over time. We were supposed to finish at 12, but Dr. Jai Singh was able to come back to us. So we encourage you to stick around. His presentation is 5 minutes. He's going to share in the experience in Trinidad with the recently revised nutrition standards for schools. Dr. Jai Singh, you can go ahead and there you go. Do you have slides, or is it just remarks?
No, we just had discussion.
Okay, go ahead.
Thanks again, everyone. So first thing, I would like to talk about the breastfeeding side of it. I just went. Trinidad and Tobago also has about 4 hospitals that are breastfeeding approved, and also we are embarking on other institutions for development as well too. We'll come back to our discussion with sugar sweetened beverages. There was also an issue where we had basically different types of sugar sweetened beverage type approvals, and now we're extending that to snacks as well too. And also we also have basically about 3 other institutions that have been developed in terms of looking to our own scenario of development. So first of all, from an education perspective, we have our sugar beverage sweetener extended to snacks across schools. They have partnership with different sectors as well too. In terms of the whole part of development, program development in other snacks areas, so such as in schools, we are part of the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Sports, Ministry of Agriculture. And this is critical because we had the all health and all policies, but now we have government action who is championing the cause of development. And therefore we have rolled out a school nutritional guideline approach where we are monitoring the cafeterias to the principals. We also have, which is the most important thing in the whole program, looking at monitor and evaluation, which is very critical. So we have engaged our school supervisors as well Because the last time we had this school beverage type policy, yes, there was monitoring from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education, but we need to strengthen that approach. Given the number of schools, primary and secondary schools, we sought out the school supervisors and also a team from the Ministry of Health with Ministry of Education doing independent type reviews all the time. I think this is very critical in terms of our own monitoring evaluation process. You could have your policies, you could have your guidelines, you could have the next step really. We have implemented this program quite in the last term, from September, October to December. We're now in the second term as well of the academic year. So we are looking basically to strengthen our approach with a pilot done in different schools, and therefore we are now strengthening the pilot to see how best we can have development taking place across the different schools as well too. So again, from the monitoring evaluation side, we are strengthening that to include our school supervisors, our independent review from the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education as well too. So those are some parts of the different aspects, but also we are strengthening the water supply, which is very critical. You could have all of these snacks and beverages monitored and tracked, all of the soft drinks, but also having our water supply in a school, which is very, very critical in terms of having promoting drinking water. I think that is a part of it. We've tried to inculcate that not only in the schools, but also at families and homes as well too, which is very critical in terms of nutrition, and more importantly, having a healthy family. I think that is the way to go. The first phase is this school nutritional guidelines, working with the Ministry of Education, but I think the community and the home is very critical because there is a space in which we want to bring that culture. And the last aspect I want to talk about, we are also partnering with PAHO to have our Global School Youth Survey and Global School Health Survey being implemented, or at least in the start of the next academic year. Because I know this time throughout the Caribbean is exams, so we want to actually do all the approvals by within a couple of months. So we could have that survey started in about third week in September. So again, we could have that as well as a monitoring tracking tool in terms of seeing the results where possible in terms of our strategies, not only with school nutrition guidelines, but also from a holistic community perspective on training families, having families with good nutritional profile, good nutritional habits as well too, which is very critical in our collective strategy. We also have a program with our national in scope, looking at something called Step into Wellness. We want to have that piloted within this month to different communities as well. We're looking at lighting of grounds, strengthening our surveillance as well too. So getting communities out, getting families out into the playgrounds, into the being active as much as possible. So that pilot will start in this month, around the middle of the month, and then strengthen throughout different communities throughout the rest of the couple months. So it's a collective strategy we are looking at in developing that, not only school nutrition, but family nutrition. Thanks again for the opportunity, and sorry for being late as well. And any questions you all have, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Jai Singh. We really appreciate you making the time. I know it was a busy morning for you, and it was an excellent presentation. I mean, just reinforcing, I think for the benefit of the audience, Trinidad was the first country in the region to implement this really robust school nutrition policy back in 2017, actually the second, following on Bermuda, but a really kind of signal and trigger to the rest of the countries, and really happy to hear about the community and the family focus, as well as the M&E component, and excited to hear about the upcoming Global Youth School Health Survey. It's going to give you some really rich data, as you said, not only as it relates to food consumption, but also behavioral patterns across the spectrum of NCD risks. So thank you again, and I appreciate your offer for questions. Please all know that you can reach out to Dr. Jai Singh in Trinidad. I think his email is available online if you've got any questions, or you can direct those questions to us at HCC, and we will route them to Dr. Jai Singh. So with that said, we're about 10 minutes over. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a really rich discussion. We're pleased to have had representatives ranging from all sectors, many parts across the region and outside of the region. We heard from policymakers. And we have a good sense of what the challenges are, what the successes are, and the tools that we need to move forward. So I think we've achieved our objective today. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Enjoy the week ahead.